So yeah, I'm Dr. Peter Crosthwaite, and I'm a senior lecturer in English and Applied Linguistics at the University of Queensland in Australia. And I work on a lot of things within applied linguistics. So my main research area is a second language acquisition, academic writing, the teaching and learning of second language writing in general. And one of my other main research strands is that of English for specific purposes, English for specific academic purposes. So I've been invited today by the organizers, so Arij and the colleagues, to answer some of your questions that you put to me today to talk about the field of English for specific purposes. And I think that we got some interview questions sent through. So I'll let Arij ask the first question. Okay, so it's a pretty wild field. And the way that I usually consider it is as a kind of overarching category of English teaching that is distinct from general English teaching, in that with general English, you'd be learning the basics of the language from the most minimal kind of communication starters like, hello, how are you? I'm fine, thank you, and you? With a real focus on the language and on the grammar, on the syntax, on the vocabulary, phraseology, putting the small units into bigger units till you're able to make sentences, looking at the ability to link those sentences. And then when you can do that, to start to do things with language, start to have conversations, start to order things in restaurants, start to order train tickets, travel. But there's no real specific goal in mind other than acquiring the language. I mean, you may think you might have a specific goal for learning a language, like say passing an IELTS examination or getting into a foreign university or something like that. But general English learning is really language focused, focusing on learning the language, treating the language as an object to be studied and as a subject in its own right, like science or mathematics and so on. But English for specific purposes has in its name a specific purpose, which may not necessarily, in fact, in most cases, not really be language related or language specific at all, but rather that you have to learn the language to be able to do the specific thing that is being asked of you. Now, in that way, you're not so much focused on, say, grammar or syntax or vocabulary or sentences, but you need to know the specific language that you need to be able to understand on one hand, and to produce on the other hand, to be able to do the thing that you're being asked to do, whatever that is. And that can be absolutely anything at all. One common misconception that was made clear to me in my previous job, I used to work at the University of Hong Kong for 3 years in the Center for Applied English Studies. And I worked under the very famous Professor Ken Hyland, who, as you know, was the former editor of the Journal of English for Academic Purposes. He's also published widely on English for specific purposes and disciplinary discourses. And I learned a lot from him during the time that I was working there. And people very often get confused between English for specific purposes and English for specific academic purposes. So English for specific purposes may not actually have an academic component to it, but most of what you actually get in terms of English instruction at universities that is called ESP, or English for Specific Purposes, is actually English for Specific Academic Purposes, or ESAP. The students are learning how to write academic English for a non-English discipline. So it's like English essay writing for science, English report writing for geography, and so on. But the purpose of that writing is still academic writing, the kind of writing that you would get at university. Whereas true English for specific purposes may not have an academic component. So it's usually seen as the kind of writing that would be done on the job, for example, if we're talking about writing here. So maybe something like a dentistry report based on a case study, something like that. I mean, I can show you an example. Right, yeah, okay. So what you can see here, this is taken from my book, Learning the Language of Dentistry, which is in the Studies in Corpus Linguistics series. And this book is based on English for Specific Purposes work that I did at the University of Hong Kong, focusing on English for dentistry students. And very often in dentistry, they actually write quite a lot of things, but they don't often write research papers. They don't often write essays. Those are the kind of things they do at university. But on the job, usually what they do is things like this: case history, case reports. So you've got here a picture of a person with some teeth problem. They've got spaces in the teeth that they're not happy with. And you can see here the report, the way that it's written. We've got case history, dental history, results of the dental examination. And this is the kind of thing that they have to write all day, every day. Every time they see a patient, they got to write this. So they want training, not in writing essays or not in passing their university kind of English tests. They want training in how to do this, because this is something they have to do every day for work. So this is something that I would call English for specific purposes. I hope that that gives you a bit more of an explanation into the difference between English for general purposes and English for specific purposes on the one hand, and then English for specific academic purposes and English for specific purposes on the other hand. So yeah, I have a very good answer for that actually. And again, this is kind of dealt with in the first chapter of the dentistry book that I mentioned a moment ago. And I call this a kind of conundrum for teachers who are kind of placed in this position where they are very much experts in language, experts in language teaching, but they are not disciplinary experts, say in dentistry or geography. And it is almost impossible to find a language teacher who also has expertise in those other areas. Sometimes you can get them, but 99% of the time, that person does not exist. So it is a tall order to be able to expect a language teacher to be able to understand fully the disciplinary discourses and the ways of writing and the genres of writing that are key to that disciplinary area. So what we strongly recommend, and that unfortunately does not really happen enough, is that those language teachers need to get together and hold meetings with the disciplinary content teachers, and through consultation with them, work out what it is that they want their students to do, and work out some strategies for providing instruction that is going to help them to do that in the target language. So there needs to be a lot more consultation, but I would not expect English language teachers to also have to take extensive training in the discipline that they're supposed to enter, because that's asking too much of them. Their expertise lie in language learning and teaching, and many of them hold master's degrees or even PhDs in that area. They know how to teach the language, but they've got to consult with the disciplinary teachers and to sit down and to work out a joint curriculum together, and also a joint method of assessment as well. Well, sure. I mean, through the course of instruction, through their content instruction, the learners will be picking up a lot of disciplinary language and vocabulary from the readings that they're assigned, from the experiments that they're conducting, from the cases that they're working with. So there will be a lot of kind of incidental language. So what the language teacher needs to do is to try to raise awareness of which vocabulary and structures are kind of key to that field. And one way that is increasingly common in English for specific purposes language instruction is to use disciplinary corpora. And through data-driven learning and getting students to use corpora, or at the very least for language teachers to use corpora of disciplinary texts to extract the keywords and vocabulary and phrases that are present within those texts, and from those lists try to develop teachable materials, that is a very strong weapon or tool that the English for specific purposes teacher can use when trying to teach students disciplinary vocabulary. And there are a lot of studies out there now that explain different methods and procedures for doing that. The software that we have now for compiling self-built corpora of disciplinary text is now mainly free, available online, very easy to use. And I've been working a lot both in Hong Kong and as well here at the University of Queensland on using corpora and corpus activities to make students aware of how they can find disciplinary vocabulary through corpus consultation. Of course, that helps to speed up the process, but you'll never, the best, although the slowest method is, of course, to read lots and lots of texts within that discipline and make sure that they're the kind of texts that those people would ordinarily encounter in their day-to-day jobs. The resources that will be out there, so say disciplinary readings, will be written at the highest level. You typically publish research papers or real case notes taken from real patients, things that are already kind of written by expert writers. So in order for beginner language learners to understand these, it's going to be really, really tricky. But that doesn't mean that you cannot tailor or modify some of the existing beginner EFL materials that you use to focus more on the kind of vocabulary and structures that you might get within that disciplinary area. And the main reason for that is to just make sure that that kind of beginner language teaching stays relevant for the students. I imagine most of these students will be adults entering university. Some of them, they may even be at the graduate level. So they've already gone through their undergraduate EAP. And from what I understand, but what I'm trying to say is that, yes, you could still do those kind of beginner lessons. So focusing on like building sentences and building paragraphs and things like that. But instead of the topics like, how was the weather yesterday? Or tell me something you did on the weekend, just make it a bit more job specific, make it a bit more discipline specific, just so that you're maintaining interest. And even though it's quite different from what they're going to be getting in their day-to-day jobs, at least you're doing all you can with the level of the students that you have. And you've got to use that time really kind of as sparingly and as carefully as possible. And what I would do is I would take a task-based curriculum essentially, and have as the goal each semester to identify 3 of the most important kind of written or spoken products that they're going to be doing in that discipline. And you can ask the disciplinary tutors what that be. So for dentists, for example, the 3 most common things they'll be doing will be case report, patient interview, like pre-examination or conducting an examination, and then maybe some kind of doctor consultation or paper, for example, something like that. So choose 3, and then each semester you're kind of building up to one of these. And yeah, you're probably not going to end up with one that's like, and it looks anything like a real one, but at least it could be a sample that kind of looks or feels something like that. So that at the end of their training, they can say, well, at least I've had a go at this, at least I've had a go at this, at least I've had a go at this. With a bit more time and effort, maybe I can go on and do a better one. And I think that with that limited time, having that kind of task-based, goal-based kind of assessment focus and curriculum is the way to go. And each week you tackle a different part of that genre. So say if you're doing case reports, week 1, you do the introduction. Week 2, you do case presentation, like what are the problem. Week 3, you look at treatment options. Keep it super simple, but still representative of what they would be expected to do in their day-to-day work. And I just think, given the time you've got, you're doing your students the best service in taking that kind of approach. Otherwise, you're just kind of wasting your time, and you're wasting their time. I guess I kind of hinted at that in my lab. If you've got a task-based curriculum, then the assessment should be completion of the task. So if they're building up to interview a patient and ask them to do an examination, that should be the assessment. And they should all have a go at doing that orally. If their semester's goal is to do a case report, they should write a draft case report. And maybe they can get some feedback on that. Because I think one thing we haven't talked about yet is written corrective feedback. And written corrective feedback, specifically for writing, is absolutely important in helping students develop, particularly in a short space of time. So that feedback can be focusing on linguistic issues. So issues of vocabulary, grammar, and so on. Or the feedback could be coming more at it from more of a disciplinary area. So saying something like, well, that's the wrong procedure, or we wouldn't do that with that kind of patient, or that kind of thing. And again, here's where consultation between the English teacher and the disciplinary teacher can be really useful, so that if the English teacher can be trained a little bit about what to look for in terms of giving that feedback beyond the linguistic kind of focus, I think that can be really useful. And then if the student can be invited to make revisions based on that feedback for a second draft, that's enormously helpful. And that should be a part of any curriculum. And maybe that second draft should be considered as part of the assessment. But you also have to make sure that the written corrective feedback you provide is not just correcting everything for the student. So it shouldn't be in the form of direct written corrective feedback, but it should be indirect. So you've shown them that there's an issue, but you want them to try to fix the issue by themselves. But yeah, don't forget to have some kind of written corrective feedback in there. and then to make sure that your assessment is focused on the task that you've been building up to over the semester. And you can set a rubric which kind of shows their relative level of completion or quality of standard. So, and again, having a rubric in discussion with the disciplinary teacher is another really good opportunity. Ask the disciplinary teacher, in your opinion, what makes a good case report? What does a student need to do to get the best score here? Take their advice into account, add that into your rubric. But if you don't have that collaboration between your English teachers and your disciplinary teachers, then your English teachers are kind of working in the dark, and they don't know what they're assessing, and they don't know if their assessment is fair. They don't know if they're assessing in the same way that their disciplinary teacher would be assessing. So you got a big problem. So constant communication is very important. Yeah, I mean, I guess I went through my main point. That's to keep it focused on the discipline. So try to avoid generic topics. Try to adopt a task-based curriculum where you're focusing on a specific goal of something that they would be expected to do in their everyday, day-to-day job. So that's the distinction between English for specific purposes and English for specific academic purposes. You don't really want English for specific academic purposes. So you don't want your students writing essays if they don't write essays in their job. You want students to be writing the things that they'd be doing in their job and have that as your curriculum. Third, close consultation with the disciplinary teachers. Ask them, what do they want? What are they looking for in their students? What are their students' language weaknesses? What kind of feedback should we give them? What kind of assessments work? Get that communication going. And then to try to set up, if you can, a suite of courses that cover the major sub-disciplines of your field. Because you might find that, say, your biology lecturer might be doing quite different things than your chemistry lecturer. And your chemistry lecturer might be doing different things for your dentistry lecturer. So you really need to develop specific suites of support for each of those sub-disciplines if required in your context. And then I guess 5 is not to expect too much, but just to do what you can with the time that you have, and just to try to do your best to prepare students for their everyday working lives. And I think that if you can do that, then you will capture the students' attention, and you'll be working in close synergy with their disciplinary tutors. And if everybody's working in harmony, then hopefully by the end of the student's studies, they will be better prepared to enter that discipline when they graduate, whether that's in their home country or if they decide to go overseas to work in a foreign country.